making progress, acting on climate in a measurable way, right? So last month we had James Jones in ESB is here today, and this month Bus Éireann, another I think founder member of FTA Ireland, Freight Transport Association of Ireland, and Stephanie Marr from Bus Éireann is going to chat to us about the experience, this time from an infrastructure point of view. I think setting up the depot as opposed to the vehicles. We tend to talk a lot about the vehicles. This is very definitely about the infrastructure. So, Stephanie, if I can invite you up here, and I'll explain how the tech is currently working. That's it indeed, and get you moving. So, at this stage, I've given up on the mouse, right? Okay. It's if you press that button there, it'll go forward. Yep. Okay, that's it. Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Okay.
Hi everyone. So do this, I have to say so. Hello to everyone online. A couple of colleagues online too who like we have some questions if there are some later on as well. So thanks very much for inviting us here to talk about our Athlone town service electrification project. You may have heard in the media in recent weeks that the full town servicing at Athlone went to full EV vehicles. 29th of January was the operational start-up date. Okay, so I'm going to just try and focus, as you say, on the infrastructure side. I'm not going to do every single bullet point, but it's just, I suppose, I presume that the presentation will be circulated later, so you can go through the detail and look, feel free to drop us questions on that at a later stage. That's okay, no problem. Okay, so I can actually barely see this myself. So this is just to give you an overview of the project. We obviously had to provide full electrical charging infrastructure on our depot in Athlone. If anyone's familiar with Athlone, it's across the road from the railway station, literally across the road. It involves 11 single-decker vehicles, and each vehicle has 350 kilowatt battery. So what we installed on site was 9 Heliox chargers, twin guns, so they can charge 2 vehicles at a time. We have 1 Heliox mobile charger. There's obviously all the various management systems, vehicle management systems, depot management systems, all that kind of stuff. We had to do a full depot yard redesign, new substation, we had to put a new drainage, trenching, all that kind of stuff around the site, and I'll show you some photographs later. This was the first Pathfinder project delivered, and this is only the first phase of works at that particular depot, so we have more work to do there, and we officially launched 20th of January, and the first service ran on Sunday the 29th of January. And so far, everything's going fine, thanks be to God. So just overall view of the works of the depot, and this is just more to give you a flavour of the timelines involved. We first engaged with ESB Networks back in August or September of 2021. And there's a process to go through with ESB Networks in terms of applying for the MIC upgrade. And essentially from September 21 until end of last year, that's how long it took to get power on site. The power was actually officially switched on. The new supply, I think actually around just before Christmas week, just gone. So that's just to give you, and that's not really a huge delivery of power to site, but it's just to make people aware of the kind of timelines involved. And we have, go through some other sites a bit later on. There's even, longer timelines there. Again, planning permission had to be sought and granted. That took around the 3 months, but we had a few issues around that too. So again, I won't go through everything here, but key considerations. Clearly, you've got to have fleet, you have your chargers, you have the depot, and all that goes with the depot, the operations, how you're going to operate on site, all the various parts of the grades of employee and all their interactions with the vehicles. Lots of work done around employee training, lots of work done around safety, new assessments, new equipment required, and then communications plans. So I suppose just in terms of the fleet, one thing to watch out for, and this might be just peculiar to the bus industry, because bus industry is peculiar to, generally speaking anyway, is warranties around the vehicle and the batteries, how often you can charge your battery. That was just some of the things that we found, that there was particular requirements around how often you actually charge your battery. So it's just, look, I'm just trying to give people, learnings from what we had. It might not be the same with vans or that, potentially trucks. I'm not too sure, but just to point out that we did come across that. with this particular fleet, not so much with other manufacturers. It again depends on your manufacturer. Okay, so in terms of the fleet and the timelines, so we have a complete engineering department who are all about fleet and procurement of fleet and speccing of fleet and all that. So I suppose just to point out that they've been obviously engaged with the potential fleet transition for a long number of years, and they've been watching what's been happening in Europe. As we know, Europe is probably a bit ahead of us in terms of delivery of battery electric vehicles in public transport. But they first actually had an electric bus in Athlone in 2019. So they first started talking to the NTA about this in 2018, but potentially moving an entire town service to EV. So they got agreement, decided to progress, had an electric bus on trial in Athlone to sort of understand the operation of it, and then from that it progressed on to actually doing a detailed plan. So just to say, from throughout the pandemic, a big red circle is in fairness to the engineering department. Usually we would go, let's say I used to be part of the engineering department, I'm not any longer, but we would have had series of factory visits to actually meet the team who are building the vehicle, specing the vehicle and all that kind of thing, but all that had to happen online this time around because we weren't allowed to travel through COVID. So God bless them, they got through it, but I'd say it was very challenging because they had to do video tours of the vehicles in build and all that kind of thing. So I'd say it was quite trying. But look, they got there. Vehicles started to arrive into the country, kind of, I suppose, Q3 last year, and obviously were PDI'd and went into service just recently, as I say. So kudos to our engineering department in fairness for getting through that. So our next picture is just kind of a schematic of the vehicle, just to show you, I suppose, where the batteries are. So battery packs are in red here, some behind the rear seats and mostly mounted on the roof. We were discussing earlier about the management of the heat of the battery. So there's actually a battery thermal management system on the roof as well. And these particular vehicles come ready to transition to pantograph up charging if we do go down that I suppose, particular way of charging or operation in the future. So they are ready to go with that if needed. That's just to give you an idea of the vehicle itself. There's a few pictures here of one of our actual vehicles in the coach and bus show in Birmingham last year. That's actually one that's EA is our fleet number. We have 11 of them. So looks quite nice in the new NTA livery. No mirrors. It's all cameras now, so we have eliminated the actual wing mirrors. So that, again, that was a small bit of an adjustment for, I suppose, our drivers. But it's a nice looking bus, in fairness. Okay, so I'm just moving on then to chargers. I just have a few photographs just to show you exactly what's on site, and I'm going to go through a bit more detail. So we have, as I say, 9 chargers, twin gunned, there's cable management system, obviously bollards to protect the chargers. They're all on concrete plinths, wheel stops. You can see a vehicle plugged in and charging there. So there's quite a bit of kind of site design layout as to where the charging point is on the vehicle as opposed to where the charging point, the actual charger is, making sure everything lines up, that you've got enough space for circulation. There's a good bit of thought goes into actually the layout and the footprint in advance. There's a walkway down around the side of the site. I have an overview of the site as well to try and give you a better feel for it later on. So these are new substation here in the background. We had to build a new substation for obviously the new power supply. These are 9 power modules, so 1 for each charger. Sorry, I can't actually see on the screen, so I have to move across. Apologies. This is just, that's actually the new substation. That is the garage there in the background. You can see the line of charges down one side. We put in new LED lighting as well while we were digging up the whole place. And this is actually the embankment where the new cable came across the road into the site. So that's where ECB Networks brought the cable on site. Again, just to give you an overview of the yard, that's what it looks like at the moment. The garage is sort of the front here, your power modules, an array of chargers down here. Yeah, just trying to give you various views of it. And also I have a few views of, I suppose, in the cable trays, the cable runs, what we had to install around the existing building. So the building itself didn't change, just the substation is obviously new. The garage hasn't changed. The garage has been there for a long, long time. So you can see the kind of, I suppose let's call it retrofitting or whatever you want to call it, that had to be done to get the power around the site. Okay, so again, just to try and get into a little bit more of the detail. So clearly you need the required power to site. So look, we would have spent a lot of time engaging with these networks. I've said here, talk to them early and often. We are at the stage now, so we have about 10 of these type projects in the pipeline. Some of them are multiple sizes of this. So we have developed a very good working relationship at this stage with these networks. Took us a while to get up and running because they kind of wanted to know our short, medium and long-term plans. They need to know how that fits in with their, I suppose, nationwide network, what works they require for us, but also taking into account all the other applications they're getting in various areas. So that's, I would say, clearly a key relationship to build on. So as I said earlier on, approximately 15 months from the application of the MIC increase to actually get the delivery on site. In Athlon's case, because we just have a garage and some admin offices on that site, we only had 41 kVA going to that site previously. It's now 1.1 MVAs. But we do have other sites coming on stream that are going to be 6 MVA. They're going to be big sites. So, yeah, it's quite a lot of work and a lot of engagement with these networks. That's kind of the process is like, you talk to them, you go through your plans. They make a letter of offer to you, you accept it or you don't. When you accept it, you must pay up front, whatever the cost that they tell you. And I suppose I put it versus reality here. So we have experienced it on other sites where we got a letter of offer, paid for it. It was a significant sum of money, 7 figures. Okay, so just to be clear, some of the costs are quite high, but which is fair enough. But then when we got to actually meeting the local guys on the ground, they had a different way that they wanted to connect to the site. So it sort of threw us a small bit on another site, not this site, but it's just to be aware. I suppose it doesn't always follow through exactly the same plan, but ESP networks have different pressures on them that they have to take into consideration as well. So it's just to be aware you can get a curveball thrown at you, okay? So there's a land transfer has to happen. You need a new substation built. And I'd also point out, so whoever your energy supplier is, talk to them early and often as well, okay? Because so we have a certain type of contract. Bus Air is part of the CA group. We have a group-wide contract, and be aware of their contractual requirements. We're obviously going to see a huge increase in consumption on one site. Your tariff structures. So in terms of financial planning, budgeting, it's quite complex to actually work out what your budget might be going forward in terms of your tariff structures. I'm just talking from our own experience. It's just to be aware, and your supplier might not be able to tell you up front necessarily what it's going to look like for your site because they've only had experience of a small consumption on that site. So it's a different tariff structure, okay? So that's just on our contractual terms. I'm just pointing out for everyone to be aware of their own contractual terms. Design and planning application process. So we use Irish Rail New Works for all of our design and architectural requirements. And obviously we have a whole load of our own internal stakeholders to take into account as well. We got planning permission without too much difficulty, I suppose, but there were a few queries that came back from Westmeath County Council that we kind of weren't expecting. A lot of them around environmental concerns, the treatment of the substation, what it looked like from the outside, even though you can't see it from the street. But there was other complications with the site in that Westmeath County Council want to take part of our site for a new road. So there was a little bit of toing and throwing, okay. And I said earlier that this is the first phase of works at that site. We have an adjoining site that we want to expand into also. And this is part of the negotiations with the County Council in terms of road space and what we need. But look, we overcame all the difficulties, but it's just, you don't know what's going to come at you with the planning. You would hope everyone's on the same page, but sometimes it doesn't always go according to plan, but look, we overcame it. Procurement, okay, we're subject to public procurement, same as anybody else. We have not really taken on this type of project before. It was our first time doing it internally within Ciarán. We set up a framework panel sometime in the past that we would just draw them off that framework panel for potential suppliers. And I have to be clear with the required competency to deliver the project. Because I suppose this is kind of a new area in Ireland. We don't necessarily have a huge array of Indigenous people who can actually deliver these projects. But in any case, the appointment of ESB Smart Energy Systems, they were the appointed contract to deliver the entire project, right? That's including civils, so we require them to do everything, a design and build contract, okay? Irish Rail, they manage the project for us, like they do project management as well. And then in terms of our own internal stakeholders, this is the array of departments that were involved across the company to actually get this project over the line. That's just internally. I think. I'm sorry, I can't recall your name from Dublin Port. You know, was at the SEI conference recently and overheard our CEO saying it was actually about 40 stakeholders involved in delivering the project. So it's complex enough and requires a huge amount of communication and collaboration. Okay, so just to give you an idea of this site, as I said, it's directly across the road from both the bus station and the train station. This is obviously the way it was. We had a parking area here in the middle with the plinth. All that had to be removed. We had drainage works required here because we had an issue, excuse me, sorry, didn't issue that, with pooling or ponding in the centre of the yard and all that kind of stuff. So that's what it used to look like. This is the site I'm talking about that we want to move into, and the new road that the County Council is to go along this southern boundary of the site here. That's what they're planning. Okay, and that is the garage, and at the front here is an admin building. Okay, so we had a phase-in plan for the site because you can't just do everything in one go. Fortunately, we can't shut down and not operate. So I suppose, look, we have to keep the depot operational at all times: staff parking, bus parking, fueling, everything. As I say, the new bypass works, we had to engage with the County Council. We required new drainage works on site. And I suppose, yeah, we had difficulties with the land agreement. It's just, look, there's complexities around land, as we know, future-proof our own design. So we had 4 phases. The blue one is the first phase, and that was actually digging out new trenching, water, various supplies to a temporary structure to keep the site operational while we demolished that and the new substation had to go in there, okay? Phase 2 then was along the northern boundary, which is where you see all the chargers. Phase 3 was another. That's the southern boundary that the County Council want to take. And then phase 4 is actually delivery of the power across the road, down the embankment of these networks. Okay, so you can see an outline of the working days for each phase. Generally ran on time. You know, there's always going to be on the site difficulties, you know, so. So this is what the site looks like now. I'm sorry, I don't have an actual overhead view up to date. No, well, we are using drones in a lot of places, but we didn't get around to this site at the moment. So, full site boundary, all the new layout here for the, this is the EV charger zone and a walkway, and there's just other bus parking here because it's only 11 vehicles are being charged. We still have a separate fleet, you know, still being fueled with diesel. New fit room, substation, etc. there, okay? Okay, let's just give an idea of the overhead. Some stage we get an updated, lovely photograph. So just to move on to learnings. Like I said, key relationship, ESB networks. We've developed a good relationship with them now. We've given them all our plans. They know exactly what we're doing for the next 3 to 5 years anyway. Be aware of the timelines, be aware things can change on the ground. And it's important that you are, like in our case, because we've such, you know, it's going to be a big power draw, load balancing is important to try and reduce your MIC requirement to site. Again, the planning permissions, environmental constraints, procurement. I don't need to go through them all again. So I suppose the main thing that we developed now, and I suppose more internal, competence with delivering these kind of projects. We've learned a lot. We've had to do a lot around safety, both workshop safety and I suppose yard safety, and because we are maintaining these vehicles ourselves as well. A lot of upskilling of both driving staff, maintenance staff, new tools, all that kind of stuff. And I suppose, yeah, even just around finding the right contractor to deliver the project, that was I would think it's fair to say the Smart Energy Services learned a lot from this project as well. I think it's fair to say. And they came across difficulties that they weren't expecting either, but they were very good to work with, in fairness. And we got there in the end. Future-proof your site, because we know that site is going to develop further in the future. You have to balance. We know that site is probably going to expand in terms of EV fleet. So I suppose if you're taking a long-term view of your sites, if you know it's going to continue expanding, you have to balance up. Do I take the full MIC now, or do I take a part of it and do I, expand that to capacity later on? You have to talk to ESB Networks around that as well. So it's just to be aware that there's a balancing act there if you know you have future expansion coming. And we are looking at doing kind of phased MIC increases in other sites. We're talking to ESB Networks about that currently. So this is to give you a flavour of the other sites we are currently working on. So Limerick, we're hoping, is going to be up and running before the end of this year. Okay, Galway not too far after. Cork is at capacity on that site, but there's a huge programme of expansion of public transport scheduled for Cork Bus Connects. We're currently actively seeking a second temporary site and ultimately a much larger full-term site in Cork somewhere, and all the other kind of town services around the country. And we hope to continue, bidding and winning additional contracts from the NTA, which I suppose over time will also go EV. And that is all I have to say. I hope it was informative. I just want to give you a flavour for some of the learnings, I guess.
You certainly did, Stephanie. Yeah, I think we're going to do questions after Ciarán has spoken about the 10T, but I think I've certainly got loads of questions. If you have questions, feel free to enter them on the chat and or raise your hand and let me know. But yeah, thank you very much indeed, Stephanie. That's fantastic. Well done. Yeah, and I think gives everyone a really interesting view on the amount of action that's actually happening on the ground. Right, there is real life vehicles, depots, conversions, all happening. Maybe not getting as much airtime as it should, but it's out there. Just as many of you have been running gas trucks for many years, HVO trucks, electric vehicles, electric vans, etc. So a lot of progress going on. But as I said, we're going to run this, get both our speakers up, and then we'll go to Q&A. So our next speaker is Ciarán Cuffe, MEP, who's joining us, going to chat to us about the 10T networks, I think. But I think you're fresh from securing a successful deal on the Energy Performance in Buildings Directive, which I know we just spent our time talking about the buildings. But yeah, I think it's the alternative fuels or the all fuels group, and I think we'd be very interested to hear what's going to happen with 10T. Do you want to come up and join us here on the camera?
If you have the internet there, I might pull up a slide or two just to give a. If you do. Is that your?
That's and it's connected to Teams, so we've about 20 odd people online as well. So.
Well, no, look, I'm happy just to work directly.
Right, sure. Okay.
Talking.
Just let you have the floor there.
Yeah. You just maybe stand and hold you.
There's the green light. Yeah.
No pressure. At least I'm used to this.
There you go. Yeah.
So I'll bring that up from my cheat sheet with a couple of notes there. But what I want to do maybe over the next 10 minutes is talk a little bit about the work that I'm doing in Europe and give you a flavour for what's happening in terms of the European Green Deal and the changes happening there. And Stephanie, that was great to get the real detail of something that's happening at a local level. But I guess the world I'm operating in Europe, we're looking at the bigger picture. We're working in an environment of 450 million people, and we're trying to push legislation on that will make it easier to do the kind of work that you just heard about. In a sense, I see it as being a revolution, but it's a gentle revolution, and it's reshaping our lives in so many sectors, in transport, as you know well, but obviously in energy, in construction, in agriculture. And really what we're trying to do is deal with the enormous challenge and difficulty of what I would now call climate breakdown, the kind of extraordinary weather we've seen over the last few years. We know the climate is changing and we need to do something about that. So at a European level, within the 27 countries that are represented in Brussels in the European Parliament, the headline is the European Green Deal. And this is what the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced 4 years ago. And, you know, the European Green Deal within it has the aim of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions in Europe by 55% by 2030 compared to 1990. The good news is we've been doing quite well over the last 30 years in Europe. The low-hanging fruit was easy, but it does get more challenging as we move towards 2030. And if you think that's difficult, getting to 2050 and carbon neutrality is hugely challenging. You know about that every day of the week in your own work. And in terms of this reduction of 55% of over half of the emissions, it ain't easy. And we can't just wave a magic wand and say, let it be so. We are passing somewhere between 50 and 20 new laws, directives at a European law. Some of them are directives where the member state has a certain flexibility in how they implement it. Some of them are regulations where there's no flexibility. That sounds a bit odd, but if we take, for instance, the file I'm dealing with on sustainable aviation fuels, clearly we can't have 27 different types of sustainable kerosene in use around Europe. We have to have an exact standard and keep to that within every member state. So that's a regulation, not a directive. The directives have a bit of flexibility. Within the Parliament of 700 members, we tend to specialise. You tend to be given a file and then you're the chief negotiator for that. A huge amount of my work over the last year has been on a directive called the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. We already have one, but we're recasting it. And part of the recast is bringing in charging requirements for e-vehicles. So if you do a major renovation of a building, for 1 in every 5 parking spaces, you'll have to have e-charging. But I mean, this is happening anyway. And certainly in Western Europe, in Northern Europe, you can see people are voting with their feet, they're buying electric, and that's putting pressure on all of us to follow that. So that's the Buildings Directive. So within the Buildings Directive, I'm trying to get solar panels, heat pumps, deep renovations, minimum energy performance standards. But one subset of all of that is e-charging and making sure e-charging is there. But we also have the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation. So that is coming along as well. And that the big picture there is putting in place charging networks along our main roads all the way through Europe. And those charging networks are obviously firmly focused on electric charging, but also we're still in negotiations. There's a commitment there on hydrogen. Then it starts to get tricky because there will be winners and losers in the push to alternative fuels. Clearly, there's an awful lot of lobbying going on AFIR, and currently in terms of the where things are at, clearly electricity is going to be one of the winners in all of this, but there is also a discussion as to whether LNG is a winner, whether other types of fuel could come through, but LPG and CNG are not currently included. That could change over the next few months, but I think electricity is going to be the real winner. And the kind of conversations I'm having with people at the moment, and Stephanie, what you're talking about there, battery technology, I think, is evolving so quickly. I think it will rapidly displace many of those other fuels within a short space of time. So Transport, in a sense, has been a bit of an outlier. We've managed to reduce emissions in agriculture, in energy, in buildings, but transport, the emissions have increased over the last 30 years, not just here in Ireland, where they increased dramatically as Ireland developed, but around Europe as well. So it is a tough nut to crack, but we do believe the move away from petrol and diesel towards electricity will be a game changer, particularly as we decarbonise our electricity grids. And it's not just about hooking into electricity, it's also all the work you're seeing with the move towards offshore wind here in Ireland, and also interconnectors. The interconnector between Ireland and France will export a lot of wind from the new renewable energy projects in Ireland. And when the wind isn't blowing, yep, we'll be bringing in electricity, nuclear electricity from France as it happens. But the overall balance will actually be more renewables on the grid. And Eddie O'Connor from Ireland has been doing a lot of work on that. He's launching a book this Thursday about the kind of the super grid and the work he's doing. But in a nutshell, he's saying if we reinforce the electricity grid around Europe, we can absolutely go green much faster, because the wind is always blowing somewhere in Europe, or the sun is shining. There's always, the more we can move this renewable electricity around Europe, the easier it is to make changes. But meanwhile, we're still extraordinarily reliant on diesel, on gas, on conventional fuels. So the kind of rows at the European level are about how long do we stay with petrol and diesel and gas. You saw there was a vote last week where we are absolutely phasing out the production of the diesel and petrol engine for use in cars and light vans by 2035 with interim targets. I think it'll happen faster than that. I think the industry takes 10 years to adapt, and they see which way the wind is blowing, and I think that will happen very quickly. We're also seeing movement on trucks, and the European Commission did produce a proposal on trucks. I would say, coming from the Green Corner, it wasn't as ambitious as we certainly wanted it to be. I think there's a target there of 90% non-conventional trucks by 2040. But truck makers will have to reduce the average CO2 emissions of new vehicles by 45% by 2030, 65% by 2035, and 90% by 2040. So no zero emission target yet, but certainly you can see the glide path that is happening. We would argue that we need to go further, because the EU climate law is saying this is where we want to be by 2035 and 2040, and this truck law is not aligned with it. Because in some sectors we're not moving very quickly. On the sustainable aviation fuel, we're talking about 2% SAFs by 2025, 6% by 2030. So you can see we're moving very slowly with aviation. Why? Because it's very hard to produce an equivalent of kerosene. We've two paths we can go down. We can go down the biofuels route, and obviously biofuels are talked about a lot, but as you well know, there isn't enough biofuels to go around. I mean, I remember 10 years ago being up in Tesco Cabra, and they were taking all of McDonald's used cooking oil around Dublin, and they're fueling their zero carbon store in Cabra with used McDonald's cooking oil. But there's not enough McDonald's to, keep your truck fleets going. There's not enough McDonald's to keep every aeroplane in the air. And I think we have to take a very sober look at the role of biofuels in future years. What also is happening is that we're seeing imports into Europe of ostensibly used cooking oil. But, there isn't enough used cooking oil. And I'm fairly sure that this is virgin palm oil coming from the Far East, being relabeled into European markets. And I put down a question to the European Commission on this, and the fact that they are taking 6 months to reply would indicate to me that they're not sure about the supply chains on this as well. So everybody wants to use biofuel and everything. There's not enough of it to go around. And while, the fats, oils and greases, the fogs, we can use them, and it certainly will allow us to start with aviation fuel and indeed with other vehicles. We simply cannot expand it at the rate that actually the Irish government's plans are saying we'll do, or that Europe's plans are saying. So that's another compelling reason for moving to other forms of fuel. For aviation, the other forms of fuel are what we call synthetic fuels. And basically, we manufacture synthetic fuels by combining green hydrogen, in other words, hydrogen that we make from renewables, with carbon dioxide, which we make by direct air capture. And you kind of put these into a test tube and it goes bang, and you end up with a fuel that is equivalent to kerosene. So for an airplane, you can put it into the same fuel tank. Really important for flying that it's absolutely the same qualities as Jet A1. So that will happen. But the synthetic fuels are going to be expensive in the early years. It'll increase the cost of flying. And I think in terms of ramping up that market, 6% by 2030, you can see it's going to be a tough ask. But I think electrification will be the bigger news elsewhere. I do want to talk about 10T. So maybe in conclusion, the 10T file, which is under discussion in the European Parliament at the moment, is ongoing. We don't have full clarity on it. A lot of the routes, the winners and losers of Irish roads and Irish ports, will be decided at council level. In other words, Minister Eamon Ryan will be sitting down with his 26 colleagues to determine what ports and what road networks and what rail networks will get to go ahead. One, as a sidebar, one of the problems of not having the assembly up and running in Northern Ireland is we don't have clarity on what Northern Ireland's wish list is. But hopefully we can find ways of feeding that into what we're doing. My colleague Jakob Dalund from Sweden is the negotiator for the Greens on this, and he has a bigger overview of the file. But we haven't cast in stone the lines on the map yet, and that will happen over the coming months. It's interesting that part of this file is a discussion of the single European digital enforcement area, and this will replace weigh-in systems with an entirely digitized system. So I'd be interested in any thoughts that you might have on that. Any last points? LNG charging, I mentioned briefly. Despite acknowledging that LNG is to be transitional, there is a requirement in the AFIR to have LNG charging points, and that will probably go through to the final text on that one. I've talked about biofuels, HVO. A limited role would be certainly the view within my political corner at a European level, and the concerns of batches of oil being bulked up with oil from Malaysia and in Indonesia. So that is the broad picture. Just to talk briefly about rail freight, the European Union is putting a huge amount of money into rail freight at the moment. It was great to see Joe Biden taking the train to Kyiv yesterday, joking. But within Ireland, obviously you can see Minister Eamon Ryan is opening up fines the rail connection there. Rail isn't cheap, but it is a very low carbon way of bringing stuff around, and certainly there are many applications of bulk freight where we could use rail for part of that journey, but obviously in a small country it's hard to put something onto rail and take it off again, and I think we're all too well aware of that. So look, I think I will maybe just to mention, we're talking about batteries, hydrogen fuel cells, hydrogen combustion for trucks. And there is a move from the European Commission to introduce energy efficiency targets for trailers, which they never had before. So while trailers obviously don't have motors or engines, lighter and more aerodynamic trailers can reduce fuel consumption. And Aidan, we discussed that out in BWG about a month or so ago. So transport is the hard one to crack. When it's not as hard as aviation, but it is, road freight is a hard one to crack. At a European level, getting modal shift onto rail is part of it. Less so in Ireland, but it's still there. But really, we want to try and work with fuels that can dramatically reduce emissions. And as the grid decarbonises, not just in Ireland and around Europe, electrification, particularly with new technology, I think is the way forward. So thank you.
very much indeed, Colonel. You covered, I think, every mode and every possible fuel at a fair scallop there. And you also
bicycles.
well, that's actually true. Yeah, absolutely true. You're absolutely right. Cargo bikes, yeah, of which there's a few members.
Final mile.
Final mile. There you have it. So well done indeed. So now it's open to questions. Now I have quite a few. Typically what we do is to try and give preference to the people that are online. So if anyone has an online question, I did say to you online, key them into the chat, but I can see you've been a little bit shy. So now's your opportunity to raise a hand, and I'll just stop talking for a second just to let you raise a hand and jump in with any questions online. Otherwise, we're going to go to the room for you just to, let's see. Just count to 5, make sure I give people a chance to jump in. Okay. Online has had its chance. Again, back to the room. Who would like to ask a question? I suppose Stephanie first, just as you were up there first in terms of grid. Any questions for Stephanie in terms of how things were worked out for?
Well, I'd just like to say thanks to both of you, Stephanie and Ciarán, obviously welcoming you on behalf of Ftai Ireland. Here we had a few technical issues just before you arrived, Ciarán, so a bit late getting off the ground, and perhaps that's a reason why people are a bit shy online. But I think it's just fabulous, you know, the information that's been provided, the kind of the people that we have around the table, people that we have online are very, very interested in decarbonisation, very interested in leading the way from a freight distribution logistics perspective. And I think it's quite important in terms of sharing information and sharing experiences. So very interested in the information that you shared in relation to that project. Because I mentioned to you earlier, Stephanie, I think we certainly need projects like that to happen for it to catch on with everybody else. But I think, and then obviously, really appreciate Ciarán coming here, because Ciarán has been very open to us as an association to listen to our concerns and issues from European level from the moment. You know, you've become a member of the European Parliament with your engagement in terms of the Transport Committee. I'm very open to listening to the concerns and issues for the industry. And I suppose one of the main points from the Alternative Fuels Working Group's perspective is having a balanced approach. And I think you've acknowledged it in the fact that the wider European transport policy doesn't easily transpose itself onto a small island perspective. And I think that's a real challenge for us as an industry in terms of our engagement with politicians, in terms of engagement with stakeholders. But it doesn't mean that the industry lacks ambition. And I think that ambition is very relevant in terms of what Stephanie was highlighting here, but also in terms of other members that have, you know, introduced gas into their vehicles at a time when they were looking at solutions for transition. You know, like we kind of see the issues and acknowledge, you know, that CNG in particular probably isn't top of the agenda, but very interested in seeing the European Parliament's announcement last week around the production of biomethane, the real focus in relation to that, and that understanding of how the implications of that in terms of supporting zero emission transport solutions, particularly in the heavy goods sector, is quite interesting, because there's quite a bit of you know, infrastructure development and time and investment required in relation to all these types of projects. And you know, it definitely isn't, there's no easy solution. And when we look at the Climate Action Plan 23, you know, and I think we mentioned it at the last meeting last month, freight is acknowledged, you know, as nearly a chapter, page 201 for the first time ever. But it's using language like transformational change. And it does require this kind of collaborative approach to understanding what the solutions are. But there's also kind of and I know sometimes, you know, people get frustrated that it might seem like there's a lack of ambition or it's very slow to change. Like 2030, you know, within the Climate Action Plan, 3,500 low emitting heavy goods vehicles in this country. I think there could be a lot more than that, but we have to consider that you can't get diesel trucks, let alone alternative fuel vehicles. There's supply chain issues and all of that type of stuff. But in terms of summing up my own comments in relation to it, and perhaps asking a question from Stephanie, you know, the wind doesn't actually blow all the time. you can look, and it's hard to store electricity, you know, so when the extra demand on electrical requirements, there has to be a backup, you know. And again, we have to be careful that we don't demonise gas as, you know, we do. Everybody wants to go to kind of net zero, but we have to have a pragmatic view of life in terms of building new, better infrastructure that can support, you know, the production of energy, you know, that can help us move towards that, you know, hydrogen world perhaps. But you know, you're going to have to create so much surplus energy to make that a viable solution. But you know, from the Athlon's depot's perspective, it is some project, and it is just incredible to get all that information, because we sometimes don't think about the infrastructure. We think, oh yeah, I'd just love to get an electric truck, or I'd like to get this. But the infrastructure behind it, the stakeholder engagement, the time length, and all of that, that's massively important. Sharing of information to the members. So I really appreciate that. But like, what happens if the electricity goes down? You know?
Have you got a diesel Jenny out the back?
So, well, as I was saying earlier, I don't think there's any diesel generator that would charge 11 buses all at once in any case. I suppose some kind of energy storage on site is something that we are looking at. We're only at the very early stages of it. We have engaged with some companies in the UK to understand how they currently do it in some locations, with other public transport operators and not just public transport, but you know, other industries as well. As I said, we are looking to expand that Athlone site. In any case, we do have more space, and you do need space. So that's one thing to be aware of. But that is a concern. I can tell you definitely from our perspective, we had on one of our sites before Christmas, not a bus charging site, but a complete power outage in a site, and we have generators on that site that literally just power emergency lighting and the sprinkler system in case there is a fire. So like that is an area that we need to examine very closely, because at least with diesel, if your electricity went out inside, you couldn't actually physically fuel yourself, your pumps weren't operating, you could just go to the local forecourt. But let's be clear, this is a new way of operation. And I suppose in a word, I don't have the answer to that yet.
Well, I think there's a nice segue there, Stephanie, in that some of the fastest charges in the countries are up at Athlone services just around the corner from you. So I don't know if you've tried getting the buses in there yet, have you?
We haven't as yet, and I think so. It was the other bit that we didn't talk about. That I didn't talk about today was this whole communications protocols that have to go on between buses or vehicles and the chargers and the charge management system. So we're going to have to explore that. That's for sure. I think generally, if you plug in a vehicle, it will get charged, but you mightn't have the proper comms between all the various technology.
Not to mention the cash. Yeah.
Yes, that too.
Where's my fuel card?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely right.
So look,
But I think it's a good question. I mean, you mentioned, Ciarán, the AFIR and, you know, potentially the charges and the infrastructure going in on what would be the 10T routes when they're eventually decided. But, you know, how soon, how quickly will operators be able to expect to see that their vehicles, their heavy duty vehicles, will actually be able to access charges, do you think?
I'd be hesitant to throw a figure out there. You know, it's terrible.
People in the room here for you.
And it's like, you want me to actually know what happens under the bonnet. So I mean, I would think we're 2 years away from that actual rollout. So there is a time lag. I mean, one of the upsides of all of this is the possibilities for bi-directional charging. And you mentioned, you know, what happens when the wind isn't blowing. But if we have 100,000 or 300,000 electric vehicles charged in, contractually we can use those batteries to deal with the spikes, those evening spikes of the grid, and we can tell, you know, smart charging means that you come home, plug in the car and say, don't charge this until 3 in the morning, but then you can give 20% of your charge over to the grid if it needs it. And dealing with those spikes is an important part of how the grid will be managed going forward. But it is a very real issue, you know. I certainly grew up with power cuts as a kid, with strikes and oil shortages that led to power cuts, and you do kind of go, Janie, what does happen when if the grid goes down for 3 hours or 6 hours or 12 hours? And I think that kind of that is a conversation that has to be had.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think it's an underappreciated aspect that people don't understand the size of the batteries that are going into these vehicles and the capability they have to actually see particular areas and particular parts of the grid stroke the community through particular outages and other issues. And we don't really see it as yet because it's very, very early days. But you can already see the people who have vehicle to load on their cars tweeting, you know, I managed to save the freezer during the power cut because I was able to plug it straight into the car. Now that's a tiny version of what happens at a grid scale where organizations, some of the companies in the room get paid hard cash to make their batteries stroke generators stroke whatever available to the grid. So it's I think that's a, you know.
And I mean, you've heard of bodies like Energy Cloud who are using the surplus wind energy at night to provide heat to the hot water cylinders in social housing. I think Respond or Fluid are using that. So it's a nice way of spilling the excess wind generation. But we also need to do it the other way. I mean, I have a pal out in Dunleary, built a passive house with solar panels. He's getting enough juice out of the building to get 15,000 kilometers for his Volkswagen in the driveway. And he basically has also 3 big truck batteries that essentially store the energy and run the house for him. So he's getting all his electricity for the house from the roof and enough left over to do a decent mileage on the car. I'm not saying that will be the future for everybody, but the role, the bi-directional role of these batteries will be significant. The batteries are getting more efficient. We're moving away from some of the rare earth metals like cobalt. So there is some good news happening on that front.
Just speaking about kind of putting in that capex and investment that has to go in with your colleague there in the house. I mean, coming back to Bus Éireann, you mentioned, Stephanie, it was one thing that caught my ear was paying up front. The cash flow implications of that. I mean, like, were you 6-7 figure sums to get things in?
Yeah, that was with ESB Network. So yeah, when you get your letter of offer, you have a certain time period to accept the letter or not. And assuming you accept it, like it comes with a price, so you pay it. And, you either pay it or you don't. It's like they're not waiting for you. They've got lots of other people in the queue, you know. So yeah, look. It depends on, I suppose, the location that you're looking at. It depends on, I suppose, from Network's point of view. The grid in that location, it depends on all the roads. When we go to sites that are, you know, bang smack in the city centres, which are proving very complex to get a letter of offer for, and the site I mentioned with 7-figure sum, yeah, even we weren't quite expecting that level of money we were expecting a large figure, but not what we got. And like I say, that was fine. We accepted it and we paid it, and then we met the guys actually local to the site, and they were like, well, no, we're not doing it that way at all. We want you to move your substation. We're like, well, no, we can't do that because we've got planning for this plan. So we've had to come up now, and we have overcome it, but like it's not without its heart-stopping moments. You're kind of going, what the flip? Like, we thought this was going to go.
And yeah, just so people have heard it out here, this is inside your depot. You have to get planning. Right, so yes. just people are aware. So there's cash, there's planning, so there's quite a few dependencies there. You know, now, Ciarán, one of the things that caught my ear when you first started speaking was you're talking about the amount of legislation that's coming through to help accelerate and make things happen. So are we going to see any unblocking or synchronization of all these regulations that will help us out?
I mean, there's a huge effort to make sure that they interlock with each other. If you have 15 new laws, that there isn't contradictions, and they do use as a cartoon image of a kind of a honeycomb of how all these different pieces of new laws talk to each other. It includes things like the carbon border adjustment mechanism to make sure that we don't have cheap imports into the EU where nobody's paying a carbon tax on concrete or steel that's coming from halfway around the world. I actually had a letter from a tillage farmer yesterday complaining that the Irish cattle feed was being produced in Brazil or somewhere to conditions that wouldn't be allowed in Ireland. So it's across the board, this concern of the distortions that will happen in the market. But on a more positive note, because I'm shepherding this piece of buildings legislation through, just about a month ago, the European Central Bank issued an opinion, which they very rarely do in legislation. They said, look, we want to see this Energy Performance of Buildings Directive come through. It gives us certainty in terms of our loan portfolio, in terms of providing the finance that will be needed in the years to come. But it is causing new financial instruments to be put in place, where you might get the solar panels on your roof, but they belong to a company that will make sure that your fuel costs will always be lower than the costs you had before. And I was at a dinner in Berlin last with a young fella who I kind of felt was somebody's assistant. He turned out to be running a €300 million business. And I was like, oops. And what he does, he goes to the household, he says, look, I'm going to put solar panels on your roof. I'll do all the work and I'll guarantee that your bill will be lower than it was before. So he's scooping up a lot of the profit from the photovoltaics. I think he's doing insulation and other stuff as well. And he's going from 300 million to, I think, €1 billion of turnover this year. So there are winners and there are losers in this, and it is tough for heavy energy users, and it's going to be hard. Like Ohanish Illumina, I don't want to have any great sympathy for Russian oligarchs, but it is an Irish industry that employs a lot of people, and they are finding it tough with the energy prices. And actually, Stephanie, I was just going to ask you, as a group, do you hedge on energy prices? Do you know?
We do. Yeah. Particularly few because. But certainly for Plus Air, so CIE Group has a common supply chain for all the energy sources currently, so electricity, gas, and fuel diesel. So the diesel is by far and away currently, as you imagine, the largest energy source, and we hedge that at 18 months out all the time. So we are now starting to look at hedging electricity as well, because clearly that's going to become a new, very significant energy source for us, particularly the two bus companies going forward. And I suppose rail obviously, clearly the Dart in particular has huge electricity consumption already, but they are looking to expand obviously their electricity as well.
And one thing I didn't mention was that obviously in the week that is the anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the European Union's response to that has been something called the Repower EU, which is essentially to accelerate rooftop solar, heat pumps, and also to find other sources of gas. So we've gone out to Qatar to source long-term contracts for gas. The problem is we're only looking for 10-year contracts because we're moving 20 years. In 20 years' time, we want to be beyond that. So we have to compete with China that comes in saying, we'll give you a 30-year contract. But we've also Norway and Algeria are providing huge amounts of gas. So we're down, I think, 87% on Russian fuel within the last year, which is pretty significant. And that will continue. I mean, I think in a way it just gives an added momentum to the drive away from fossil fuels. Funny, when you were talking, it reminded me of, there was a pic doing the rounds on social media of a Tesla in Ukraine with a generator on the back of it, reflecting the reality of living in a war zone. But talking about hedging, one of the challenges at the moment is to decouple the electricity market from the gas market. And this is real red wire, blue wire stuff. You can't do it overnight. It will be a piece of legislation over the next year, going through the European institutions. So basically we have been unable to pass on some of the benefits of cheap renewables to the consumer because the market is tied into the last bit that you put in to keep the grid going, which is often gas at a higher price. But clearly we have to reform that market. The formula goes back 20 years to when there was very few renewables on the market, but it looks as though over the next year or two, we will be able to actually pass on a lot more of the benefits from renewables, which will be
fingers crossed.
I just one final question, just related to the 10T. Like, do you think Ireland is at a disadvantage in terms because of our limited core network on the 10T? Like, in terms of it, all the investment that's required, even like I know that we experienced this with the Causeway project in terms of gas, and it was very much aligned, European money aligned with the 10T network. But we just, it's Belfast, Cork, and Limerick, or whatever else, and then everything else is on the comprehensive. So, even Rosslare isn't connected properly on the core network.
I think the current mood in Brussels is to absolutely help Ireland with the challenges that we have, particularly post-Brexit. And there has been a huge focus. I often say, look, we're very focused on the new accession states of Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia, Albania, all these countries that want to join. But actually, there is quite a bit of time spent on ensuring that Ireland isn't left in trouble as a result of the challenges of Brexit. So I think there will be quite a bit of scrutiny and assistance to make sure that we do get what we need from the 10T. But clearly, as an island, it's more challenging to kind of have joined up thinking. One of the things I was fascinated by, we had a trip from the Transport Committee over to Germany, Austria and Italy, and we were looking at the Brenner Base Tunnel, which is a huge engineering project. But I was quite surprised how disconnected the whole damn thing was, that Germany was doing one thing, Italy was doing another. The tracks have to cross over because the Italians drive their trains on the left-hand side, the Germans on the right. Like this mad stuff of tunnels going over each other. You think Europe has all of this sorted out, but they don't, and completely different regulations. In Italy, you need 2 people in the cab, in Germany and Austria, 1. So even just building a tunnel brought all these complications into the mix, that things aren't all smooth in the European.
Yeah, no, I think there's quite a bit of progress going on. There's a lot of people in the room who've made a lot of progress, a lot of projects, and certainly one of the things we like to do here is recognise, you know, as much as possible and raise the profile of the fleets, because the fleets, typically the fleet operators in particular, tend to be in the back. Like as someone was saying to me there at the lunch break, you know, the CEO's photo opportunity is kind of with the windmill and the solar panel, you know, or a new building. They don't really think of the trucks and the vans and the other items that are out there. But there's no doubt about it. Like, you don't need planning permission. Provided you can get a truck or a van or whatever the case may be on a whatever it is 12 months lead time and the infrastructure to go with it, you can make change happen. You can make measurable results happen. You know, and we are seeing that with the fleets out there. They are doing it. But I'm conscious of time. My job is to try and make sure you're all on time. So I'm going to skip over Aidan's last piece. Let you say a few words.
A couple of words, right? Because I just want to move on to the slides there.
Yeah, which one do you want to
go to? The
there. The gas one is there. Gotcha.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is just finish up there, because we have the opportunity to go out, and we're delighted that Virginia Logistics have brought one of their gas trucks, which is powered on renewable biomethane, which we're delighted with, and gas networks as well. Yvonne is here, has organised one of their trucks branded up in, you know, clean powered energy there. So we're going to go out and have a look at them and take the opportunity to have a photograph or whatever else. But I just want to, there's an awful lot of things happening, I think, for the benefit of everybody online and for ourselves, really. This is really informative, and I think the key message for this is the collaborative approach. It's the sharing of information. And you know, as a trade association, we're very much reliant on our member engagement because there's a massive amount of change happening. It's a very exciting time, you know, I think within the industry in terms of innovation and investment in time and all of these type of things. But it's happening at a pace. A couple of things I wanted to mention from a membership engagement perspective. The haulage strategy was published, as we all know, last December. One of the first actions within that strategy was the establishment of a road freight forum, and the first meeting of that forum is taking place on Thursday this week. One of the agenda items is a longer trailer trial, which obviously then, if it comes to pass, has implications in terms of decarbonisation, reduced vehicular movements on the road and stuff like that. So that's one of the points. Another part is looking at kind of the revision of the driver CPC programme and so on and so forth. But over 1/3 of the actions within the haulage strategy, as we know, are related to decarbonisation. So it's a really, really important piece. And when we look at the Climate Action Plan, and I know I've said this before at the previous meeting, but the Climate Action Plan 23, you know, refers back into this freight forum and the haulage strategy for the leadership and direction in relation to decarbonisation of the freight sector. So it's within our hands, and it's that kind of participation, and certainly the information that's passed through this alternative working group and through our other mechanisms within the membership is really important in terms of setting the agenda and engaging in a positive way towards all of this type of change. So an awful lot of things happening leading up to, which is obviously linked as well with decarbonisation, because skills shortage issues are actually new type of skills, as you mentioned, in terms of the new skills that are needed for electrification or for gas or whatever else. With the first ever logistics and supply chain skills week happening on the 27th of March. So there's a lot of events happening that week, and we'll keep you all posted in relation to that. But participate or attend as many as those, and we're obviously using the opportunity to be kind of highlighting the 2 apprenticeships that we have under our belt: the Logistics Associate Apprenticeship and the Transport Operations Commercial Driving Apprenticeship, the HGV Apprenticeship that started in September. And Megan Yates started here yesterday. He's going to help us for a few months in terms of working on the apprenticeship programs. And Megan, a lot of you probably knows that Megan won actually in Russia a number of years ago, 2019. Megan won a gold medal in freight forwarding. So we're delighted Megan's available to help Anna on the projects, the apprenticeship projects. So you'll be hearing from Megan, and she'll be involved in a lot of that skills week in March. So they were the main things that I wanted to tell you, but we'll keep the information flow going to you all. So
we'll stop the recording now. We'll obviously have a quick chat and then off we go to take some photos. I'll just quickly flash up that in addition to this training that Aidan spoke about, some of the other training programs that we've often spoken about are now SkillNet funded. So if you're interested in that, do please touch base with Tanya and Nicola. And as always, the program around EcoFleet and the Green Standard and getting saving fuel and get paid is there. Get your data in, get things up to date. Kind of last call on that at the moment. And with that, I think that's it with us from today. We're stopping the recording.